Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning on the West Coast. My name is Paul Donaher, and I am Director of Client Services here at Radius. Thanks to all of you for attending today's webinar on driving innovation through job-focused storytelling, which we're very excited about. And firstly, I hope everyone is staying safe and doing as well as possible in the current environment. Webinar today will be given by the two ladies that you can see on the screen, Joanne Suh, who is Senior Vice President of Client Services here at Radius, and Kristina Martinez, who is Senior Manager of Marketing Insights at one of our clients, Abbott Laboratories. The webinar, as always, is scheduled for a maximum of 45 minutes. And if you would like to, and please do, type a question on the screen if you would like to ask Kristina or Joanne a question. Of the 45 minutes allocated, ladies will speak for about 30 minutes, and so we should have time for some Q&A at the end. And by way of introduction, during today's webinar, among other topics, you'll come away with an enhanced understanding as to a couple of main points. Why and how both client and research partner leaned in to recommend a new research approach, how this methodology was different and why it worked, and you'll discover why the insights uncovered led to a new way to think about the brand's innovation and marketing strategies. Of course, it's worth pointing out, like many of you, some of us are bunkered down in our home offices or tucked away in the corner of our home. Please forgive any noise that you hear in the background, and of course, we'll do our best to minimize any technical snafus. And so to our two speakers. Joanne is a senior member of our client services team here and has also worked on the client side of the business with Procter & Gamble. Joanne lives in Cincinnati with her husband, 3 children, and one of whom I happen to know has just gone off to West Point. Congratulations on that, Joanne. And 2 dogs. And in her spare time, Joanne loves to sing in a community choir and plays in a sand volleyball league. She was keen to tell us that she was champion of that league in 2010. Kristina loves to develop insights that deliver results, especially by using innovative research solutions like that which you're going to hear about today. Kristina also lives in Ohio. She lives in Columbus with her husband, 2 daughters. She has a cat called Leo and a completely adorable cavapoo called Wesley. Kristina is very active in improv, although she promises me this is not going to be an improv session. But like many of us, she would love to get her passport out and use that again just as soon as possible. So with that introduction, Joanne, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Kristina, for joining today. So hello, everybody. Today, Kristina and I are going to talk about how much we value an approach that we recently used and tell you a little about that journey. We've been working with Abbott for over 6 years now across many of their brands. And over the past few years, we've been working more closely with Kristina and the adult nutrition side of the business to really help them better understand the consumer, their consumers' behavior, and ultimately uncover their needs. So last year, Kristina and I were working together on a project specifically to drive innovation and better messaging strategies for one of Abbott's leading brands, Ensure. So we ended up leveraging a non-traditional approach that her team was less familiar with. So that's what we're going to be sharing about today. And that knowledge that we had of that kind of non-traditional approach really allowed us to guide Kristina and her team through the research journey. So Kristina, can you start off by telling us a little bit about the challenge that the Ensure brand was facing and why you looked to include the consumer perspective in this initiative?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Joanne, for having me here and co-presenting this with you. Our brand, so Ensure is a brand that is a nutritional drink, and we're doing well. I mean, a lot of times we're looking at situations where the brand is struggling or things like that, but our brand is doing really well. We knew a lot about our consumer, and we designed these products for a particular type of consumer, and we knew that consumer really well. And we've built our business and our strategy on that knowledge. we have also learned and discovered through the years that there are other people that have discovered this product and are using it as sort of life hacks or in other ways that that also benefited them. And so we wanted to better understand how other people were using our products, what value they were finding in it, because there's an opportunity to expand that for people who have similar needs, and we could better meet their needs and maybe find new opportunities for us from an innovation and a message communication standpoint. So we really were looking for something that was going to help us organically listen to their stories and hear why they're using it, so that could help us grow our foundational knowledge to build from. So as we thought through that challenge, and it's a nice challenge to have, to be in a strong position but want to continue to grow, I reached out to you and said, hey, here's a business challenge. What do you think? Do you have ideas? Do you remember that first call, Joanne? Seems like forever ago.
No, I do. It was a little bit out of the blue, but honestly, that's one of the things I really value about our partnership is you're always open to exploring and brainstorming different methodologies. We don't always have to do the same thing, and I really appreciate that. So, you explained the business challenge to me. You explained kind of your team dynamics, that, they were kind of set in their ways of how they typically do research, and that we wanted to really break through. So we brainstormed a few different approaches, and the jobs to be done approach came up. And this was something that, at Radius we've been using for years and we're familiar with, but I found out that you were familiar with it as well. So maybe you can share a little bit about how you learned about the jobs to be done approach.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who know or don't know, jobs to be done is an approach that Clay Christensen developed, I think, back in 2016. He is sort of the grand poobah of innovation, and he was speaking at a conference in 2017, and I had the pleasure and opportunity to hear him as a keynote, but also meet him. So you can see this really lovely picture here where I just fortuitously got to sit next to him at lunch, and it was like the work equivalent of sitting next to like your rock star idol and being like nervous and not knowing what to say. But he was an absolutely lovely man, and really hit it off with him. The story he told, and there's many stories that you can find online about jobs to be done and what it is, and we'll talk through that in a second. But the one that stuck with me that from that presentation that he gave was about school and what are the jobs to be done for school, like K through 12 school. And as he's an excellent storyteller, so as he unfolds the story, he talks about, some of the jobs to be done for the parents are, education and babysitting and things like that. And some of the obvious jobs for the students are, building skills. But what he really focused on was this sort of latent job for the students, which was really about daily accomplishments and having them get the feeling of, I did something today. And even when I tell that, it sort of gives me chills, because I think about how different that is to think about what students are trying to accomplish and like what the job is for school. And as you think about that, like, how does that transform the way you think about what school is for, and how is school delivering on that job every day? And what does that help inspire you for, if your school or your parent, a parent, on helping school deliver on those that job every day? So that sort of really resonated with me, and I saw such a huge potential to really change the way we looked at our products and our services and think about it from more their point of view. Joanne, how did you kind of come to know about the jobs to be done?
Yeah, so you had shared this school story with me, which was new for me. We had been trained on the jobs to be done method within Radius with some training several years ago. And then I did a little my own research and uncovered the milkshake story. So this might be something that more people on the call are familiar with, but this one was the one that really resonated with me and kind of, made me really understand the whole concept of jobs to be done. So essentially the story is Clay was working with a fairly large fast food chain called McDonald's, and they had discovered through their sales data that they were selling more than any other time, they were selling milkshakes in the morning. And they were trying to figure out why that was and what they could really do around innovation or messaging to really enhance that factor, just to dig into understanding why behind it. So in true Clay fashion, he obviously knew and valued the impact of observation. And he said he set up, camp outside of a McDonald's, and as people were going through the drive-through in the morning, he and his team would stop anybody who ordered a milkshake, and he would interview them, and he would ask them all kinds of questions to understand the context of what was going on with them. And so through that process, which we'll kind of talk about in a little bit, he discovered that they were buying milkshakes in the morning because essentially they had a long commute to go to work and they needed something to fill their belly. And the milkshake was the perfect thing they could hold in one hand and drive with the other. And it was satisfying. So essentially that was what he discovered. But through the process, he also asked them about substitutions. He would ask them, so what other than a milkshake would you, have in the morning as well on your commute? And he'd have different people kind of say other, different things that they had tried. One might have said, oh, you know what, a banana is great. It's great on the go, but it's messy. When I peel it, I've got to peel. I don't want to throw it out the window as I'm driving. That's not good. I don't want to leave it in my car. My car will smell like a banana at the end of the day. So that was one substitution. Another was a bagel with cream cheese. You can hold it in one hand, but gosh, if you get cream cheese on your hands and on your car, it's messy. The seeds get everywhere. So that wasn't a great fit. So essentially they had landed on the milkshake. It was the perfect, easy, convenient thing to have kind of on their commute to work. So that's the milkshake story. And that really kind of, resonated with me because it was insightful in that it's unexpected. You wouldn't expect a milkshake. Everybody would say, oh, the job to be done for a milkshake, it's a sweet treat, right? But this was serving a completely different purpose for these morning commuters that he uncovered through that. So essentially, the jobs to be done framework is really based on the premise or the philosophy that consumers hire and fire brands to meet their end goal. And really, it's understanding that end goal that helps you kind of peel back the onion and understand the job that people are having, that they're hiring the brand to do. So in the McDonald's example, the goal or the job was to give me something to fill my stomach and keep me occupied with little mess on my way to work. So it's really about cracking that code and truly understanding all those different jobs that your product can do and understanding it from the consumer's perspective. So long story short, after our discussion, Kristina, after you shared that story and we talked about the milkshake story, we really kind of knew this methodology was the right fit for your business challenge. How did you know it was going to be the right fit for Ensure and the challenge you had at hand?
I think there are really two things. One, this whole idea of the whole, that they're looking for a hole, not a drill, and that really put us in a different mindset. And I think the other is this idea of hiring brands. Hiring and firing reminds you that you have to compete and have to get hired every time. You can't sort of sit complacent and just think that you own something. So there's this, they're making a decision each time, and there's something neat about making sure you're understanding that and always understanding where they're coming from.
As well as the competitive set. Like you said, it's easy for Ensure to think about its direct competitors, other nutritional shakes, but did the McDonald's milkshake, did they know that they were competing with bananas and bagels with cream cheese? No. So it's a whole different way to look at your competitive set.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Kristina, this approach was different. And how really was this different than other kind of research that you and your brand team do quite often?
Well, in some ways it's not different at all. It's listening to and talking to consumers, but in a lot of ways it is different. Oftentimes when you're doing research, you're setting the learning objectives, you're working with the supplier to execute and then deliver on the insights with some participation from the team. And if you sum that up, not to dismiss any of it, but it's a little bit transactional in that way where you know, we work together, but you carry a heavy burden on it. But this is definitely far from transactional, and as we go through the approach, we'll see that it really required a lot more commitment from the team.
Yeah, what do you think were the keys to success for this particular approach?
This was so much more of a collaborative effort. So we listened to the consumer stories, but you really had to do the work after hearing the stories. And so in order to get there, right, so you could see where the journey was going, in order to get there, one, we had to get the team's commitment up front to do this and do this approach, and getting folks to feel comfortable with like how you're going to approach the interviews and do that and where it was going to go. It took a little bit of trust and willingness to do something a little different, and that willingness and commitment up front, it was key to the success of people going through the journey. Second, the time commitment. We are able to put this in a few weeks. I can't remember exactly how many, 3 or 4 weeks we got it done. So it wasn't like this was a months-long project, but there were different elements as you go through that we needed to have commitment and full commitment to the journey. It wasn't something that people could kind of pop in and out of as much. You really had to kind of go through the journey to be able to work through the job definition and then the activation on it. And then, you know, and so that's time commitment and the team's role. So the team is not passive in this. The team is very active at different points, and they have roles and very specific roles to play as they go through, and they are I don't know, maybe like a detective, and listening to the stories. You know, if this is, I'm totally improvising here now, but you know, if it's a CSI episode and they're getting the clues from the consumer and the testimony that they're giving or whatever, but it's on our team to kind of figure out what really happened or what's really going on, and that takes a lot of work from our team. So those were really key things that we worked very hard to make sure were in place going into this project to ensure the success. And as we talk through that, you lay out a plan that kind of helped guide us through that. So I think the nice thing about Jobs We've Done is there is sort of a framework on how we can go do this. Can you talk us through that plan and how it's different from other research?
Sure. Yes. And yeah, and I don't want to under represent kind of what it took to sell this in, because I remember you and I had several conversations with your team up front just to convince them that this is the right approach. So that was hard work, but you know, you and I kind of partnered together to do that. So once we laid out kind of the approach, we knew that the first step was going to be having a team workshop. And this really was bringing all your key stakeholders across multiple functions, right? There was product innovation, R&D, marketing, that were all involved in this upfront workshop. And really, the intention of this was to, you know, get their commitment and their alignment to what we were about to do. Get their time commitment, like you said, that, you know, here's the time commitment this is going to take. We're going to need you to be listening to consumers throughout these interviews. Maybe not all of them. You did a good job of kind of dividing the interviews among your team, but then also teaching them how to listen and how to really listen to the consumer story, because it's, like you said, it's slightly different than just traditional research. So that was the first stage. We also laid out the second stage was going to be the exploratory quals, and we'll talk a little bit more about what we did there. And then we wrapped it up with a very important synthesis workshop. Again, bringing that cross-functional team back together. So this was the approach we laid out and kind of sold into your team. And essentially it was, you know, we had to let them know it was going to require significant time and an investment, right? It's not cheap to get all of this together and to bring the team together, both from a time and a cost standpoint. And so that's sort of the journey that we laid out for you and for the team.
Yeah, so before you move on though, Joanne, like I remember I kind of was like, do we need all 3 of these steps? Like, are they all necessary? Our team was very eager. And how did you convince me not to skip step 1?
Well, you know, we've done this quite a bit, and I've seen projects fail miserably if there is not alignment up front. And what happens is you get to the end of the journey, you have these great insights, and then if you didn't have the buy-in on the beginning, a lot of times they'll dismiss it because they didn't understand the approach or they weren't along on that journey. So, you know, I really emphasize that on the front end, it's so important to get the alignment, and on the back end, bringing those people back into the point where they're analyzing and really thinking through what we learned and the implications of it. It just gets everybody much more invested in the work that we're doing.
I think I would build on that as well. The exercise of getting the hypotheses out was really important because we could identify all those, and it sort of cleared everyone's palate to be able to listen more, which I thought was really helpful.
Right. So that's essentially what we did during, we had kind of 4 key goals during that discovery and align workshop. Number 1, it was to educate the team on jobs to be done. And you asked, you know, do we actually have to do this step each and every time? And I would say yes, even if you have a team that understands the jobs to be done framework, you might have a new member, you might have a new cross-functional partner that's new. It never hurts to refresh people on the framework itself, as well as why we're doing the research. What's the challenge? What's the true objective? So
hypotheses change, right? For each product, the hypotheses change and evolve for each product. So it does make sense.
Exactly, exactly. And what you know today. So if we do this again in a year, there is other research that you probably would have done along the way that we can revisit and get everyone grounded in that same knowledge. And then, yeah, the brainstorming of the job hypotheses, I think, was the most fruitful part of this workshop. Is, you know, the team really felt like they knew a lot of the jobs that Ensure was doing, and they did. I mean, we had a laundry list of jobs, but what was great is that was our benchmark. And then what we learned from consumers was kind of the ahas, like, oh, that's something I hadn't even thought of. So, you know, to be able to juxtapose that was really powerful.
So how are the interviews themselves different when we get to the consumer stage?
Sure. So it is really exploratory. That's the bottom line. So if we go back to the McDonald's example, you know, you can imagine Clay and his team standing outside of a McDonald's, very ethnographic. It's very observational. So what we had to do, because we were in the midst of COVID, this was just last year, we had to kind of create that observation in a different way. So, you know, we had all of our consumers complete a journal exercise where they kind of tracked what they ate and drank over the course of a few days. And that really gave us the great kind of fodder and the information that we needed to go into those interviews, so that during the interviews, we would, you know, pinpoint one of those occasions where they had used either your product or a competitive product. And then we allowed the consumer to really tell their story.
Awesome. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so it really is kind of a step-by-step approach within the interview. And first, what we used that homework or that journaling for was to identify the occasions. So it's not just as simple as asking a consumer, you know, okay, what did you hire this brand for? They might look at you with really strange face, like, what do you mean? Because not every consumer understands the jobs to be done framework, right? But they might look at you like, why are you asking me that? And those answers don't always, you know, give you the immediate insight. It really takes more than that. So the method is truly understanding the underlying need and why the consumer chose that particular product for that specific occasion. So you start with the job spec. That's what that's called. And what was the occasion? And you really understand all the steps in the process: the who, the what, the where, the when. What were they doing? What were they thinking at the time? Where were they headed? What was going on in their life? That really helps you understand the context of where they're at. And then along that interview, you're uncovering different things like pain points. What pain points led them to that, or what pain points did they have during that experience? What were the desired outcomes they were hoping for? And there's, you know, social, there's emotional, there's functional needs that they're delivering or that they're needing at that time. And then of course the substitute mapping, like in the McDonald's example, we did the same thing during your research. What were other things that they considered using at that time or had considered in the past for that particular occasion? So it really is digging deep. It's uncovering all the layers of the onion. In fact, so much so that you probably remember some of the respondents would get a little tired of me peeling back every single onion, because I remember them saying, I've told you this before, but but that's kind of part of the deal. You have to really dig deep.
Well, because they've never thought that much about what they're doing, right?
Exactly.
And so really like peeling it apart, it did feel tedious, but then there were definitely nuggets in there that we would not have gotten to had we not approached it that way. And suddenly we had this much richer understanding of all of the different occasions. So when you had all of them, it was sort of like, oh, now we have this sort of tapestry of different occasions and people using the products. And actually what we were doing is we were looking for differences. On a lot of research, you're looking to converge and find some commonalities. Here, we were looking for as many unique opportunities as we could find to better understand and explore those. So that was sort of interesting and exciting by itself, because we're not as much looking for themes, we're looking for uniqueness.
Exactly. And then it doesn't end there. So that's the interview, right? And you pull out all those great insights, all that data, but then you've got to synthesize it, right? Like I said, the consumer's not going to give you your innovation ideas or your messaging strategy. Not going to happen. You have to really, that's where the hard work starts. One of the hard parts is really building out the job specs. And so, this takes deep involvement from the team. It takes active listening and good note-taking during the interviews, right? And in a perfect world, all the core team members would have heard all the interviews, but they don't. And so everyone kind of brought together what they had heard, and we pieced it together. And so here's an example, and we created a wanted poster theme for this work. But it's an example of one of the jobs that we identified in this research, one of the more obvious ones, but it's breakfast. And so you can see how we kind of built out this job spec specific for the breakfast job. And you identify that desired outcome, kind of what they were looking to accomplish with breakfast in that situation. You determine the various aspects of that need, from functional, what is it supposed to do to my body, fulfill something. How is it helping me emotionally at that time? And, we heard a lot of people talk about, well, grumpiness and things like that. And then the social aspects and that job requires. So yeah, this is just an example of kind of building out one of those job specs. Okay, thank
you. Okay, so we did about 15 of these in the workshop that we had. I would say we had 15, 20 or more left to still do. So this 15 was certainly not exhaustive. And then we had all these kind of wanted posters. And then what do we do with it, Joanne? Can you help us understand what we can use these for?
Right. So you're right. We identified 15 that we wanted to focus on for kind of the next phase, but you're right. I want to say we had upwards of 25 just, laundry list of jobs, which was great. To your point before, it's not just coming up with the top 5. That's not what it's about. It's about really exhausting that list. So essentially what we do with those is, there are, a lot of great ideas that can come out of those jobs alone. And in our session, we, since we had a great cross-functional group of people, we really talked about how those jobs will impact various different things. Marketing communications is one of them. Your marketing team was there, and they talked about different messaging and advertising strategies that they could leverage the jobs for. It can inspire new product innovation. Obviously, if there's a job that is maybe being done that you could design a better product for, right? Maybe sometimes consumers do compensating behaviors, and that's one way to determine, oh, they're making this work, but there are other ways that we could give them something better. And then understanding innovation in the context of relevant jobs. So you may not have ever innovated within a specific job that you could now kind of dig into with future innovation. And then obviously just broadening the competitive context. And that's one of the biggest things that I find jobs to be done work really kind of turns a light bulb on with clients is, oh, I never really considered product X or category X as a competitor, but it is. When you think about it from the perspective of the consumer and the job that they're trying to get done, that competitive set really broadens.
And not only that, but just really quickly, the competitive set is different for each job. So the competitive set for breakfast is different than the competitive set on some of the other jobs we built. So that also leads you in a lot of new directions with a lot of new inspiration for what to do with that. So then we moved to the synthesis workshop to figure out what do we do with it, right?
Yes, and that really worked well because since we did have sort of these different buckets of how the jobs can really influence the business, we also broke your team into small groups, basically aligned to that. You know, your product innovation folks kind of work together, your marketing folks work together. And we essentially, you know, it was about a half day or maybe a full day, I can't recall now, but workshop where we really turned what we heard, everything that we heard in the research and those jobs that we had developed and all the job specs into really now what do we go do? And that really, I think, is where the power of this kind of journey is in that synthesis and then what we're going to do now. So I'm interested, Kristina, in your own words, how is this approach different, you think, now that we've kind of walked through it?
Yeah, I think it's different because it helps us really build empathy and put our focus really in their shoes. And most of the time, qual research is in their shoes, but this was really, really less steering what we wanted to hear from them and more just really sitting in and observing and hearing what they have. So really trying to understand the value that we provide people in different settings and circumstances, and having them articulate that was important. Humbly looking through it in consumers' eyes and not trying to lead or steer how we want them to think about it. And then to me, I just realized what a gift it is to us to be able to leverage these stories and think about the consumer's experiences to help us better connect their needs with our solutions and be able to improve our solutions to better meet their needs is such an amazing thing, because that's what we're trying to do in research, you know, all the time. So it was really pretty different. Helpful for us in that way.
No, so true. And honestly, empathy is something that we talk about a lot in qualitative research, and it's sort of just baked into the jobs to be done approach, you know, because you're really putting yourself in their shoes and really understanding, you know, how they're using your product in the context of their story, the full story, not just, you know, what they used it for, why they bought it that day, right? Really getting the context around it. So yeah, it is really about building empathy with consumers, truly understanding their world and how your product fits in it, right? Their world does not revolve around your brand, even though yours does, but you know, it's a part of it, and understanding how it fits in is so important. So do you feel like, now, you know, that this project happened, what, about a year ago? Do you feel like that work is over now? And if not, what's next?
Definitely not over. It's just the beginning. I feel like it's tapped kind of a new well for us, and it's something that we can build from. It's very foundational, and I have already built new product concepts against some of these jobs. We're working on affecting communications and how to improve our communications with consumers. I know it's something that once we've explored some of the jobs that sort of were most interesting to us at the beginning, then there's more jobs that we can go in and explore. So there's still like this reservoir of opportunity for us. It did enable us to make some choices too on the business on what we want to focus on, and you know, where we want to go as a brand, seeing how consumers are using us. And I think more than anything, it helps us better learn the consumer so we can continue to offer exceptional products and experiences for them, which is what we're here for, right?
Absolutely. And do you see yourself recommending the jobs to be an approach to your colleagues or to future brands that you work on?
Yes, other brands have already been asking for it. Our retail partners are pretty excited about it, and it's gotten some attention over there. Yeah, we're definitely looking for how we use this across the business to help build those other brands and their businesses as well.
Great. And just to wrap up, I hope we made Clay Christensen proud, right? Any last thoughts you would say to him, obviously, if he were still alive?
I just find him so inspiring, and I just thank him for really giving us a new toolkit to look at and a new way. It's not wholly dissimilar from unmet needs, but there's something really unique and tangible about this idea of jobs and hiring and firing a brand, and the substitution set totally changes. That really allowed us to kind of tap a new space that we hadn't considered before. So I hope we made him proud, but it's had a big impact on how I think about research and qual research. So thank you for having me.
And awesome, thank you for joining. So Paul, I think we'll turn it back over to you for questions.
Absolutely, thank you, ladies. We have a few here. Let me pull a couple up. The first is really around, did you at any point consider taking this further with quantitative research, perhaps to prioritize the jobs? How many jobs are typical? In which way are they different? Can you build relevance and frequency and satisfaction around these? I think it's really a general question around, what were the considerations around taking this to a quantitative phase, if you were considering that?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So at the beginning of the journey, there is much more to do, and looking at quantitative, and we didn't cover that here, but we did continue to do some quantitative to try to identify the jobs, understand how many people had these jobs. We would map it into our segmentation and other ways that we looked at the business. We started looking at white space, maybe where some competitors might be playing more or less. So there's definitely more you can take and do with it from this initial focus, which we did, and we intersected that with kind of what our business needs and goals were for it. And again, I think it's something that we continue to use. So for example, as I'm evaluating new products, I'm now evaluating them against this framework of what kind of jobs do these new products deliver against. And it's really nice to see that we have different products filling different jobs and needs. And so I think there's value there. As well as driving it through with R&D and how they develop and things like that. So yes, definitely, I think there's a lot of ways you can quantify it in quantitative, and also use that as starting to be KPIs or measures, kind of key measures for going forward from your business.
Good to know. Here's the next one from Michelle. It says, it's an interesting point. Do you pull together the job steps in a flow to cover the entire job, or how do you, you talked about the synthesis, I think, in great detail. How do you come up with the job, and is there a flow to get there, or a step-by-step approach to get there?
I wish it was that simple, but honestly, I had the privilege of actually moderating all of these interviews myself. So, and I take copious notes. I just always have. And so literally, as I was going interview through interview, I was just jotting down a laundry list of, oh, that's a new job. Oh, that's a new job. Oh, that's a new, and I was just kind of creating, and I would hope to think that the client team was also doing that. We didn't have necessarily a structured way of doing that, but that would be something you could do, is just because when you know what to listen for, it's easy to identify it. And it's easy to identify that, oh, that's a little bit different. That's a little bit different. And so we just kind of kept the laundry list. And then when we went into our debrief and eventually into our synthesis, I think, Kristina, I went to you first and said, okay, here's the 20 that I have from my notes. What else do you have? And we kind of just started with a big long list, and then we kind of pared down from that. So
yeah, I think my build to that, Joanne, is like each time you're talking through an occasion and you're going really deep on like what was happening and why you're using it, we know there's a job in there. So it's not whether or not a job exists. You know a job exists. It is our job to uncover and sort of figure out what that is. So that's where we focused on trying to peel apart that onion enough to identify each of those unique jobs. And there were times that we had jobs that were pretty close together, in types of things, but we chose in some cases to keep them separate because there were different nuances that could or could not be meaningful. And then that gave the team the ability to decide whether to separate them or join them together. So there's a lot of flexibility and influence that you can have in this process, which I think goes back to why the team needs to be really involved, because everyone's bringing something to the table on listening for it and interpreting it.
Mm-hmm.
Just on that point, Kristina, the next question is, could you share any of the techniques that you use to keep the team focused when they're reviewing some very broad ranging findings from the interviews, and how to ensure all the important comments are heard while you're trying to focus on a manageable set of key jobs as the kind of main outcome, if you like?
Well, there's a lot in there. So let me say first, you have to start with a great moderator like Joanne to kind of like structure the session, right? And so we were very intentional not to have broad themes. Like, we pushed against that. So this is where we had to kind of fight the team and the inclination to try to find themes. We tried to say, okay, like, let's go through. So when Joanne described people were assigned different interviews, we would divide people up into teams, and now let's deep dive on that interview. So when, you know, so-and-so was talking, what's the job they're doing? And you're sort of forcing the conversation. And that wanted talk sheet, that wanted poster really helped give us those tools to diagnose and pull out the things that are helpful there. So I think using some of those tools and having people, again, that buy-in up front and like, hey, this is not what we usually do. Trust us, try to do it. You know, it'll come out with something good. It's getting that trust and that buy-in, and having people kind of just stay focused and giving them tasks like that. So, and then, you know, obviously you can do things like competitions on, you know, we might have done something like when you team split up, we give a prize to whoever has the most number of jobs, and that will keep people like to compete. So, you know, a $5 Starbucks card will go a long way in bringing out the competitive edge in folks.
Yeah. And I would just build on that. I think one thing that made this particular project, and really jobs to be done interviews, so memorable and so easy for people to conjure up is because we do so much storytelling. And because I was digging so deep in the interview, we got to know these people intimately. We knew what job they did. We knew what they did on the weekends. We knew how many grandkids they had, just because we were going through all the different scenarios, or many of the scenarios where they were using the product. So we learned so much about them as people that it was so easy to reflect back during our census to say, oh, do you remember Christy? She was the one who would take an insurer to her DJ job because she would stick it under the table, and, you know, in the middle of her DJ, you know, night, she would pound one to kind of keep going. So, you know, even that one is fresh in my mind, because you learn so much about them as people and about their world that it just sticks with you. And so that was happening over and over with the client team. They were remembering specific stories that these consumers were telling. So that in itself made it, I think, that much more helpful.
I'll try and get the last couple of questions in. Question from Richard: does a job essentially equal a usage occasion?
Yes and no. It does. It can equal a usage occasion. So you're obviously having a job in a particular usage occasion. But if you think about it, if you just think about usage occasions, that might be time of day or location. And you may miss this nuance, and this really important nuance of what are you trying to accomplish? What are you hiring the product to do? Mm-hmm. And it's that real mind shift of what are you hiring this product to do, which pushes you beyond just thinking about it as an occasion. So breakfast is an occasion, and I'm hiring it to do something. What am I hiring it to do? So if you stop at occasions and don't push for what am I hiring it to do, you'll miss the essence of it. I don't know if that answers it super well. So yes, and in the improv world.
Yeah, and I think to build on that is usage occasion oftentimes will lead to the functional need that you're fulfilling. Yes, you were fulfilling breakfast, you were filling their stomach, but like we mentioned earlier, there's always a emotional aspect, and oftentimes can be a social aspect to the need that you're fulfilling. And so, you know, maybe nutritional shakes is not the best example of you know, social, but you know, if you think about clothing, you know, someone wearing a pair of jeans out to, you know, let's say out to a club, the usage occasion is, yeah, I'm going out for the night. But how I feel in those jeans and how people perceive me in those jeans, those are all needs that go way beyond usage occasion. So that, I think that's another way to think about it.
Good stuff. Very last one. I know we're running out of time. Someone's talking about team size, Rajiv, but team size I think is going to vary. But what are the right skill mixes to conduct this sort of study? Who do you want in the room from the client side?
Definitely marketing, insights, R&D, developers. Retail isn't a bad idea. You know, our retail partners and teams. Depending on the type of business, we have a large HCP focus on our business. So if you have key opinion leaders or influencers in your business, they bring a piece to the story. So I'd say just whoever your key cross-functionals are that really have a piece of the puzzle and insights that that will provide a complementary perspective to it.
And I think just to build to that, Kristina, we probably just brushed over this, but at the beginning, you and I agreed that it would be important to establish a core team. So even though you had probably, at any point in time, we had probably 15 stakeholders involved, we had a core team of, I think, 5 of us. And we really got them, even as we were selling in the approach and we were signing the proposal, they were involved because it was so important that, and they were representative of all those groups that you just talked, because that ensured that we had the buy-in, and then that core team kind of remained the core team throughout the project. So I think that's another piece that's so important to ensure the success of the whole project.
Good. Folks, thank you very much for your questions. Ladies, thank you for your insights. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back in Q4 with our next webinar, or we might do a round table with a few clients. But thank you, everybody, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks. Thanks, Kristina.